If you want someone to be interrogated, well, you send him to Jordan. If you want someone to disappear, you send him to Egypt. And if you want someone to be tortured, you send him to Syria.
Imagine you are coming home. You've been traveling for hours. You're exhausted. You're thinking about your wife and 2 children. The smell of your own house, your own bed. You land in New York, John F. Kennedy International Airport, one of the busiest airports in the world. You are not a criminal, never been arrested, never been charged. You are a software engineer, a husband, a father. You step into the passport line just like everyone else. And then someone pulls you out of that line, no explanation, no warning. And in that moment, your life, as you knew it, ends. Not in a war zone, not in a dictatorship, in New York, in an American airport, under the full authority of the United States government. What happens next is not chaos. It is precise, it is deliberate, it is planned. And when the truth finally comes out, it doesn't just shock people, it changes how we understand power. Because the people who did this still have their jobs, still have their pensions, still have their freedom. His name was Maher Ara, and this is his file. Before we go any further, you need to understand who he was. Born in Syria in 1970, later he moved to Canada with his family as a young man. He studied engineering at McGill University in Montreal, built a career in tech, stable, predictable. He became a Canadian citizen. By 2002, he was 32 years old, married to a woman named Monia Mazig, herself a highly educated economist and academic. They had 2 children. They lived in Ottawa. He was, by every measure, exactly what Canada had hoped he would become when it welcomed him as an immigrant. A contributing member of society, a taxpayer, a professional, a father. He had no criminal record anywhere in any country. But somewhere inside an intelligence system, his name appeared. Not because of anything he had done, but because of someone he knew. A casual acquaintance, a man he had met at a mosque years earlier. A man who had since come under RCMP surveillance. That single, casual, undeveloped connection to another person was enough. In the post-September 11th world, in the world of the Patriot Act, of color-coded threat levels, of governments operating in a permanent state of emergency, suspicion didn't need proof. Connections became risk. Risk became action. And once your name is on a list, you find out what governments are truly capable of. At JFK Airport, he is taken through a door, a world that most Americans don't know exists inside their own country. He was taken to a detention facility in Brooklyn and was held there for 12 days. 12 days in which he repeatedly asked to speak to a lawyer. He was denied the right to a lawyer. He asked to call the Canadian consulate. He was denied again. He asked why he was being held, and there were no answers. He was interrogated repeatedly about terrorism, about organizations he had never heard of, about people he did not know, about activities he had never engaged in. And he told them the truth, over and over, the same truth. I am a software engineer. I am a Canadian citizen. I have done nothing wrong. They did not believe him. Or, a more disturbing possibility, they did believe him, but it didn't matter. Because by the time Maher Ara was sitting in that detention facility in Brooklyn, a decision had already been made about where he was going next. And it was not Canada. American officials had been in contact with Syrian intelligence. Syria, a country the United States itself had described as practicing systematic torture. a country where people disappeared into detention facilities and were never seen again. A country that the US government officially considered a state sponsor of terrorism. They were sending him there anyway. The paperwork was being prepared. The plane was being arranged. And Maher Ara had no idea. On October 8, 2002, 12 days after being taken at JFK, he was moved. He was told that he was being deported. He assumes he's going home, but he wasn't. He's placed on a private aircraft, no airline, no public record. The kind of plane that, in the years after September 11th, the CIA had been using to move people around the world to places where they could be interrogated in ways that American law did not permit on American soil. Part of a program called Extraordinary Rendition, a system designed to move people outside the reach of law. The plane flew east through multiple stops. In Jordan, Maher Ara was transferred to Jordanian intelligence and then driven in a car across a border in the middle of the night into Syria, into a facility that survivors would later describe in terms that are almost impossible to process. Maher Ara had left New York on a Tuesday. By the following week, he was in a cell in Damascus, a cell that measured 3 feet wide, 6 feet long, underground, with no natural light, no window, just a metal door, and whatever waits behind it.
What happened to Maher Ara inside Far Palestine Detention Center in Damascus is documented, not alleged. On the first day, they beat him with a 2-inch thick electrical cable. They asked him about terrorist organizations. They demanded a confession, but he knows nothing about terrorist organizations. They beat him again, and this continued for days, then weeks. He was told to confess to being a member of Al-Qaeda. The same questions, the same answers, the same outcome, until eventually he breaks.
Torture is in phases. They employ sometimes, the least torture technique is insulting, right? Then it moves back up to slapping on the face and kicking and all of that. Then if this doesn't work, it goes up to using the cable. If the cable doesn't work, it doesn't work according to them, right? Because they could always believe that you're not saying the truth, right? Then after that they use the tire, and after the tire is the chair, and after the chair is the electric shocks. So they employ those techniques. So the cable is the third in the chain.
He confessed to being a member of a terrorist organization, but wasn't a member of any organization. He signed whatever they put in front of him. It was used by Syrian authorities to justify continuing to hold him. It was shared with American intelligence. It became, in the machinery of the war on terror, a piece of evidence, a false piece of evidence. In his own words, recorded in testimony before the Canadian Commission of Inquiry, he described lying on the floor of that cell and genuinely not knowing if he would survive. He thought about his wife. He thought about his children. He thought about the fact that nobody knew exactly where he was. Meanwhile, in Washington, the officials who had authorized his rendition were writing memos, justifying their decisions, protecting themselves, making sure that whatever happened to Maher Ara in that Syrian cell would never come back to them. His wife, Monia, back in Ottawa with 2 young children, no income, and a husband who had vanished into the machinery of the post-9/11 security state, began a public campaign. She went to the media. She went to politicians. She went to anyone who would listen. At first, no one listened. Then slowly, they did. On October 5th, 2003, 10 months and 10 days after he arrived in Syria, Maher Ara was released. Not because the Americans admitted they were wrong, not because the Syrians concluded he was innocent, but because the Canadian government, under sustained relentless public pressure from his wife Monia, and from journalists who had begun to ask serious questions, finally pushed hard enough. Syrian official conclusion: he had no links to terrorism. None. The man they had tortured for 10 months had nothing to tell them, because there was nothing to tell.
He had lost 10 months. 10 months of isolation, violence, and uncertainty. And when he landed in Canada, he was still on the American terrorist watch list. Still labeled, still not cleared by the system that sent him there. In 2004, the Canadian government launched a formal public inquiry into what had happened to Maher Ara. It was led by Justice Dennis O'Connor. It lasted 2 years. It examined thousands of documents. It heard testimony from intelligence officials, government ministers, RCMP officers, and Maher Ara himself. In September 2006, Justice O'Connor released his findings. Maher Ara was completely innocent. The RCMP had passed inaccurate and misleading information about him to American authorities. That information had directly contributed to his rendition to Syria. The Canadian government accepted the findings. Prime Minister Stephen Harper issued a formal public apology to Maher Ara. The Canadian government paid him $10.5 million in compensation. And the United States government, they refused to cooperate with the Canadian inquiry. They refused to provide documents. They refused to allow their officials to testify. They expressed through official channels that they stood by their actions. And Maher Ara, fully exonerated by his own government, compensated, apologized to, remains on the United States no-fly list. To this day, he has never been allowed to set foot on American soil again. The country that sent him to be tortured will not let him come back, even to ask why. This is what Vinda Files exists for: to open the cases that were never meant to stay open. Next case is already waiting, and it's no lighter than this one.